Sarah Matthews stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her modern downtown apartment. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, but she had become an expert at concealing what lay beneath the surface. At 32, she had everything society said should make her happy: a prestigious position as a marketing executive at a top firm, a beautiful apartment, and an active social life that made her Instagram followers envious. On this particular Monday morning, Sarah adjusted her navy blazer and practiced her signature smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes anymore. Her phone buzzed with notifications: 3 client meetings, a lunch date with friends, and a reminder about her cousin's engagement party this weekend. She felt a familiar heaviness settle in her chest, but pushed it aside, just as she had been doing for months. At the office, Sarah's colleagues saw her as the embodiment of success. "Sarah always has it together," they would say, admiring how she juggled multiple projects while maintaining her polished appearance. They didn't see how she would sometimes lock herself in the bathroom stall, taking deep breaths to keep from crying, or how she would sit in her car for 20 minutes before entering the office building, gathering the strength to face another day. During the morning meeting, Sarah presented the quarterly marketing statistics with her usual professional flair. Her supervisor, James, nodded approvingly as she outlined the successful social media campaign she had spearheaded. "This is why we need Sarah on our team," he announced to the room. Everyone smiled and agreed, while Sarah felt like an imposter accepting their praise. That evening, she hosted a dinner party for 6 of her closest friends, an event that would have energized her just a year ago. Now, it felt like an elaborate performance. She had spent the weekend perfecting the menu: butternut squash soup, herb-crusted salmon, and chocolate mousse for dessert. Her friends marveled at her ability to pull off such a sophisticated gathering while managing her demanding career. "I don't know how you do it all," Rachel, her best friend since college, remarked as she helped clear the dishes. "You're like Superwoman or something." Sarah forced a laugh and deflected the comment with a well-practiced response about good time management. Inside, she felt hollow. These dinners had once been a source of joy, and now they felt like one more item on her endless checklist of appearances to maintain. Later that night, after her friends had left and the dishes were done, Sarah sat alone on her living room sofa. The city lights twinkled through her floor-to-ceiling windows, but she barely noticed them. She scrolled through the photos she had posted on social media from the dinner party: perfectly plated food, smiling faces, artfully arranged table settings. The likes and comments poured in: "Living your best life," "Goals," "You're amazing." Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother: "Saw your dinner party photos. So proud of you, honey. You've really made it." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. If only they knew how empty she felt inside, how she had to drag herself out of bed each morning, how even the smallest tasks felt overwhelming, how she lay awake at night wondering why she couldn't just be happy with all she had achieved. She thought about the unopened bills on her desk, the unanswered personal emails, the growing distance between her and her younger sister who had tried to reach out several times. These were the cracks in her perfect facade that no one saw, the parts of her life that were slowly unraveling while she maintained her exhausting charade of success. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah went through her evening routine mechanically. She removed her makeup, revealing the tired face beneath. Her apartment, usually spotless, had started showing signs of neglect in the corners where guests didn't look. Unwashed laundry piling up, half-empty coffee cups forgotten on windowsills, dead plants she hadn't bothered to replace. Setting her alarm for another early morning, Sarah pulled her premium sheets up to her chin. Tomorrow would be another day of smiling through meetings, making witty comments at lunch, and posting carefully curated glimpses of her life online. But as she lay there in the dark, she wondered how much longer she could keep up this performance before something had to give. What Sarah didn't know was that the facade she had worked so hard to maintain was about to begin cracking in ways she couldn't ignore, and the perfect life she portrayed to the world was hovering on the edge of a transformation she never saw coming. The changes in Sarah's behavior started small, like hairline cracks in a porcelain vase. It began with a cancelled yoga class here, a missed brunch there. Her friends noticed but chalked it up to her busy work schedule. What they couldn't see were the weekends Sarah spent in bed, curtains drawn, ignoring the world outside her apartment walls. One rainy Sunday morning, Sarah stared at her phone as it lit up with messages from her running group. They were waiting for her at their usual meeting spot. She had been part of this weekend tradition for 3 years, but today, like the past 4 weekends, she couldn't bring herself to go. She typed out another excuse about having a migraine, then turned her phone face down. At work, her once spotless desk began collecting coffee cups and unopened mail. Her calendar, previously color-coded and meticulously organized, showed missed deadlines and rescheduled meetings. James, her supervisor, stopped by her office one afternoon, concern evident in his voice. "Everything okay, Sarah? The Thompson proposal was due yesterday, and the client's been asking about it." Sarah jumped, realizing she had been staring at her computer screen for the past hour without typing a single word. "Oh, right, I'll have it to you by end of day," she promised, though she had barely started the work. That evening, she stayed late at the office, trying to focus through the fog that seemed to cloud her mind constantly now. The cleaning staff found her at 9 p.m., still at her desk, staring blankly at a half-finished presentation. Her eating habits changed too. The woman who once prepared elaborate dinner party menus now survived on delivery food and protein bars. Her refrigerator contained nothing but expired yogurt and wilted vegetables. When her sister Kate dropped by unexpectedly one evening, she was shocked by the state of Sarah's usually immaculate kitchen. "Sarah, there are dishes in your sink from what looks like weeks ago," Kate said, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "This isn't like you at all." "I've just been busy," Sarah replied, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Work's been crazy lately." Kate didn't buy it, but Sarah changed the subject before her sister could probe further. Social media became Sarah's biggest performance. She recycled old photos, posting them as if they were current. A shot of last year's vacation in Bali. A throwback to a charity gala from 6 months ago. Anything to maintain the illusion that she was still living her best life. The reality was far different. Sarah had started calling in sick to work more frequently, something she had never done before. Simple tasks like showering or answering emails felt like climbing Mount Everest. She stopped going to her weekly manicure appointments, stopped meeting friends for after-work drinks, stopped attending her book club meetings. Rachel finally confronted her after Sarah missed her birthday celebration, something that had never happened in their 15 years of friendship. "You've missed the last 3 times we tried to get together," Rachel said during a phone call. "We're worried about you. You're not yourself lately." Sarah felt tears welling up but swallowed hard. "I'm fine, really, just overwhelmed with work. You know how it gets." But it wasn't just work. Sarah found herself crying in random places, in her car during lunch breaks, in the grocery store while picking up microwave dinners, in the elevator of her apartment building. The tears came without warning, and she had no explanation for them. One evening, while attempting to prepare for an important client meeting the next day, Sarah found herself sitting on her kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered papers and unopened mail. She couldn't remember how long she'd been sitting there. Her phone showed 5 missed calls from her mother and several concerned text messages from colleagues about a meeting she had completely forgotten to attend that afternoon. As she looked around her apartment, Sarah barely recognized her own life anymore. The plants were dead, mail was piled up, and her usually organized closet was a mess of unwashed clothes. The woman who had once juggled multiple projects with ease now struggled to complete basic tasks. What Sarah didn't realize was that tomorrow would bring a moment that would make it impossible to ignore these changes any longer. A public incident that would shatter her carefully maintained facade and force her to confront the reality she had been trying so hard to deny. The morning of the Henderson client presentation started like any other, except Sarah's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she got ready for work. She had spent the entire night tossing and turning, rehearsing her presentation over and over. This meeting could make or break her team's biggest account of the year. Sarah arrived at the office an hour early, her blazer perfectly pressed despite her trembling fingers. The conference room slowly filled with senior executives and the client's team. James gave her an encouraging nod as she connected her laptop to the projector. On the surface, she looked composed, but inside, something felt terribly wrong. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Today, I'll be presenting our marketing strategy for the upcoming quarter." She clicked to the first slide, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. Halfway through the presentation, the room started to spin. Sarah's vision blurred around the edges, and her breathing became shallow. The words on her slides seemed to dance before her eyes. She gripped the edge of the conference table, trying to steady herself. "As you can see from these numbers," she continued, but her voice trailed off. The tightness in her chest had become unbearable. Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might explode. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her hands went numb. I, Sarah stammered, looking desperately around the room. 20 pairs of eyes stared back at her, some concerned, others confused. She couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to be closing in. Without warning, Sarah bolted from the conference room, leaving her presentation mid-sentence. She ran past her concerned colleagues, past the reception desk, past the elevators. She found herself in the women's bathroom, collapsed on the floor of a stall, gasping for air. "Sarah?" A gentle voice called out. It was Lisa from HR, who had followed her. "Sarah, are you okay? Do you need medical help?" Sarah couldn't answer. Her whole body was shaking, and tears streamed down her face. This wasn't just nerves or stress. This was something else entirely, something terrifying and overwhelming. Lisa called for help, and within minutes, the company nurse was there. "She's having a panic attack," the nurse explained calmly, kneeling beside Sarah. "It's going to be okay. Just try to breathe with me." The next hour passed in a blur. Someone called Sarah's emergency contact, her sister Kate, who arrived quickly. The client meeting had been taken over by James, who managed to smooth things over with the clients, explaining that Sarah had fallen ill. Kate drove Sarah home, casting worried glances at her sister who sat silently in the passenger seat, still trembling slightly. The perfect facade had finally cracked completely, in the most public way possible. "This isn't just a one-time thing, is it?" Kate asked gently as she helped Sarah into her apartment. "You've been struggling for a while now." Sarah collapsed onto her couch. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her professional demeanor completely shattered. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered. "I can't sleep, I can't focus, I can't even do my job anymore. Everything feels heavy." Kate sat beside her sister, taking in the state of the apartment, the unwashed dishes, the unopened mail, the general disarray that so clearly reflected Sarah's internal state. "I think it's time to get some help," she said softly. "This isn't something you have to figure out alone." That evening, after Kate had gone home, Sarah sat in her dark living room, her phone buzzing with concerned messages from colleagues and friends. The events of the day played on repeat in her mind. Her carefully constructed world had come crashing down in front of everyone she worked with. As she finally lay in bed that night, exhausted but unable to sleep, Sarah realized something had to change. The panic attack had forced into the open what she had been trying so hard to hide. She wasn't okay, and she couldn't pretend anymore. Tomorrow would bring damage control at work, concerned calls from her parents, and questions she wasn't sure how to answer. But it would also bring something else. The first step toward acknowledging that she needed help, even if she wasn't quite ready to accept what that meant. A week after the panic attack, Sarah sat in her doctor's waiting room, her leg bouncing nervously. She hadn't wanted to come, but Kate had practically dragged her here, insisting that she couldn't go on like this. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue, but Sarah felt anything but calm. Taking 3 days off work after the incident had been unprecedented for her. James had been understanding, sending a brief email saying they would discuss everything when she felt better. Her inbox was flooded with concerned messages from colleagues, most of which remained unanswered. "Sarah Matthews?" the nurse called. Sarah followed her down the hallway, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. The nurse took her vitals, making notes about Sarah's elevated blood pressure and rapid heartbeat. Dr. Anderson, who had been Sarah's physician for the past 5 years, entered the room with a gentle smile. "It's been a while, Sarah. Tell me what's been going on." Sarah opened her mouth to give her usual "I'm fine" response, but instead, unexpected tears spilled down her cheeks. Once she started talking, she couldn't stop. She told Dr. Anderson everything: the sleepless nights, the constant exhaustion, the inability to focus, the overwhelming sense of emptiness that had become her constant companion. "How long has this been going on?" Dr. Anderson asked, taking careful notes. "I don't know, maybe 6 months. A year?" Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it would pass." Dr. Anderson put down her notepad and looked directly at Sarah. Based on what you're describing, you're experiencing clinical depression. It's a medical condition, just like diabetes or high blood pressure. It's not a weakness, and it's not your fault. The word depression hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had always associated that term with people who couldn't get out of bed, who couldn't hold down jobs, not successful marketing executives who hosted dinner parties and ran marathons. Not her. But I'm not. Sarah started to protest, then stopped. Wasn't she the one who had been spending weekends in bed? Wasn't she the one who had stopped running, stopped socializing, stopped living? Dr. Anderson prescribed an antidepressant and recommended a therapist. The medication will help with the chemical imbalance, but therapy will give you tools to manage this long term, she explained. This is just a first step, Sarah. There's no quick fix, but there is a way forward. Sarah clutched the prescriptions in her hand as she left the office, feeling both relieved and terrified. In her car, she stared at the papers for a long time. The word sertraline stared back at her, making everything feel suddenly very real. At the pharmacy, Sarah felt like everyone was watching her as she handed over the prescription. The pharmacist explained the medication's effects and possible side effects in a professional, matter-of-fact tone, but Sarah barely heard him. She was too busy wondering if anyone she knew might see her there. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen counter, staring at the small orange bottle. Kate had offered to come over, but Sarah had insisted on being alone. She needed time to process this new reality. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Haven't heard from you in days. Are you okay?" Sarah typed and deleted several responses before finally settling on, "Not really, but I'm working on it." It was the most honest she'd been with anyone besides her sister in months. As she got ready for bed that night, Sarah caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, less put together, but perhaps more real. She thought about all the energy she had spent maintaining her facade, all the times she had insisted she was fine when she was anything but. Taking the first pill felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. It meant admitting that something was wrong, that she needed help, that she couldn't fix this on her own. It meant accepting a new identity, someone who took antidepressants, someone who went to therapy, someone who wasn't perfectly fine. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges. She would have to decide who to tell, how much to share, how to navigate this new territory. But for the first time in months, she felt something that had been missing for so long, a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. 3 weeks into her treatment, Sarah sat in her therapist's office, fidgeting with a loose thread on her sleeve. Dr. Peterson's office had become both a sanctuary and a source of anxiety, a place where she slowly began to unravel the complex web of emotions she'd been suppressing for so long. "How are the medications working?" Dr. Peterson asked, her notepad balanced on her knee. "The side effects are challenging," Sarah admitted. What she didn't say was how she'd spent the previous week fighting waves of nausea at work, trying to hide her shaking hands during meetings, and dealing with headaches that made her want to crawl under her desk. Only Kate knew about the treatment. Sarah had sworn her sister to secrecy, not ready for anyone else to know. She had returned to work with a carefully crafted story about a virus that had caused her panic attack. Her colleagues seemed to accept this explanation, though she noticed how they watched her more carefully now. In the office bathroom one morning, Sarah struggled to swallow her medication, her hands trembling as she tried to keep her pills hidden from anyone who might walk in. A stall door opened, and she quickly shoved the orange bottle into her purse. The familiar face of Linda from accounting appeared in the mirror. "You feeling better, Sarah?" Linda asked kindly. "Much better, thanks," Sarah lied, forcing a smile while her unswallowed pill dissolved bitterly in her mouth. The weekly therapy sessions became her anchor, though getting there required elaborate excuses. She told her team she had standing doctor's appointments for a chronic condition, not entirely untrue, she reasoned. She scheduled them late in the day, when the office was quieter and fewer people would notice her absence. During one particularly difficult session, Dr. Peterson gently challenged her need for secrecy. "Why are you so afraid of people knowing?" Sarah stared out the window, watching clouds drift past. "Because once they know, everything changes. They'll see me differently. They'll think I'm broken or weak or human," Dr. Peterson finished softly. The medication slowly began to work, but the journey wasn't linear. Some days, Sarah felt almost like her old self. Other days, she struggled to get through basic tasks. She kept a secret journal tracking her moods, her medication side effects, and the coping strategies she learned in therapy. One evening, while having dinner with Rachel, her best friend nearly caught her taking her medication. Sarah pretended to be checking her phone while slipping the pill into her mouth with practiced discretion. "You've been different lately," Rachel observed. "Quieter, but somehow more present." Sarah managed a small smile, wondering what Rachel would think if she knew the truth. "Just trying to find a better balance," she said, and at least that wasn't a lie. At work, Sarah struggled to maintain her previous pace while adapting to her new normal. Some mornings, the medication made her drowsy, and she had to drink extra coffee to stay alert. During important meetings, she battled anxiety that was different from before, now tinged with the fear that someone might notice the changes in her behavior. One afternoon, James stopped by her office. "The new campaign proposals are excellent," he said. "Whatever virus you've had seems to have finally cleared up." Sarah nodded, thinking of the half-empty pill bottle in her drawer and the therapy appointment she had in 2 hours. "Yes, I'm feeling much more like myself," she said, and was surprised to realize that in some ways, it was true. At home, Sarah created a careful routine around her treatment. Pills were stored in unmarked containers. Therapy appointments were labeled as personal meetings in her calendar, and she took her medication at precise times that wouldn't raise suspicion. But late at night, when she was alone with her thoughts, Sarah wondered how long she could maintain this double life. The weight of the secret sometimes felt as heavy as the depression itself. Yet, she wasn't ready to face the potential judgments, the whispers, the well-meaning but uncomfortable conversations that would come with openness. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah looked at her reflection and saw someone caught between worlds. The polished professional she still presented to the world, and the woman who was quietly fighting a battle few could see. Tomorrow would bring another day of carefully managed appearances, but for now, in the privacy of her apartment, she could acknowledge both versions of herself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah sat in her office, staring at her computer screen where the same paragraph had been waiting for her edits for over 2 hours. The quarterly report deadline had passed yesterday, and her inbox was flooding with increasingly urgent messages from James and the client team. Her phone buzzed with another text from James. "Need to see you in my office. Now." Sarah's hands shook as she made her way to his office. The medication had been helping, but lately, work had become overwhelming. Projects that once took her days now stretched into weeks. Deadlines slipped by, emails went unanswered. James closed his office door behind her. His face showed concern rather than anger, which somehow made it worse. "Sarah, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk about what's been happening these past few months." He pulled out a folder and began listing the issues. Missed deadlines, incomplete reports, client complaints about unanswered emails. As he spoke, Sarah felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "The Sarah I know would never let things slip like this," James said gently. "What's really going on?" Something inside Sarah broke. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice, or maybe it was simply that she couldn't carry the weight of her secret anymore. Tears began falling before she could stop them. She started, then took a deep breath. "I'm dealing with depression. Clinical depression. I've been in treatment for the past 2 months." The words hung in the air between them. James leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "How long has this been going on?" he asked quietly. "The depression? Probably a year. Maybe longer. The panic attack. That wasn't a virus," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying so hard to handle everything like before, but I can't. I just can't." To her surprise, James pulled out a photo from his desk drawer. It showed a younger version of himself with a woman Sarah didn't recognize. "This is my sister," he explained. "She struggled with depression for years before getting help. I watched her try to handle it alone until she couldn't anymore. Sarah, why didn't you tell me?" The dam broke. Sarah told him everything. The medication side effects that made mornings difficult, the therapy appointments she'd been hiding, the overwhelming fear of being seen as weak or incapable. "I thought I would lose everything if anyone knew," she confessed. "My position, my reputation, everyone's respect. James shook his head. You know what makes me lose respect for someone? Not them having a health condition, but them not trusting their team enough to ask for support when they need it. They spent the next hour restructuring Sarah's workload. James suggested she take some projects off her plate temporarily and offered flexible hours to accommodate her therapy appointments. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe. Word spread through the office gradually. Some colleagues were awkward at first, not knowing what to say. Others shared their own experiences with mental health struggles. Linda from accounting brought her coffee one morning and quietly mentioned that her husband had been on antidepressants for years. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, feeling strangely lighter despite the day's emotional intensity. She thought about all the energy she'd spent hiding her condition, all the elaborate excuses and cover stories. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Proud of you for today. Take care of yourself. We got your back. Sarah curled up on her couch, letting the tears flow freely now. They weren't tears of shame or fear anymore, but of relief. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Navigating workplace relationships with this new openness, learning to accept help, finding a balance between recovery and responsibility. But for the first time since her diagnosis, Sarah felt like she didn't have to face those challenges alone. The unraveling of her secret had been terrifying, but in its place, something new was beginning to take shape, something that felt a lot like hope. The shift in Sarah's life after opening up about her depression wasn't immediate, but it was profound. 1 month after her conversation with James, she sat in the office break room, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. The whispers and concerned glances had mostly subsided, replaced by a new kind of normalcy. That morning, Sarah had done something she never thought she would. She posted about her mental health journey on LinkedIn. Her fingers had trembled as she hit publish on the carefully worded post about workplace mental health and her personal experience with depression. Within hours, her inbox filled with messages. Some were from colleagues across different departments. Others came from industry connections she'd worked with over the years. Each message carried a similar theme. Me too. I understand. Thank you for sharing. Rachel called her during lunch break, her voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you tell me sooner? All those times I thought you were just busy or distant. I wish I had known. I didn't know how, Sarah replied honestly. I thought I was supposed to be the strong one, the successful one. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. You could never disappoint me, Rachel said firmly. But you scared me. I thought I was losing my best friend and didn't know why. That evening, Sarah attended her first support group meeting. She sat quietly at first, listening to others share their stories. When it was her turn, she surprised herself by speaking for nearly 10 minutes, describing her journey from silence to acceptance. A young woman approached her after the meeting. Your story, it's exactly what I'm going through right now. I'm also in marketing, also trying to keep up appearances. I thought I was the only one. Sarah exchanged numbers with her, remembering how lonely she had felt believing she was alone in her struggle. The next day, she created a group chat for professionals dealing with mental health challenges, starting with just a few people from the support group. At work, Sarah's openness had an unexpected ripple effect. 2 junior team members came to her privately, sharing their own mental health struggles. James implemented monthly wellness check-ins for the entire department. The company's HR department invited her to speak at a mental health awareness seminar. During one team meeting, Sarah noticed a young intern looking particularly stressed. Instead of ignoring it as she once would have, she stayed after the meeting. Some days are harder than others, she said gently to the intern, and that's okay. The intern's relief at being seen and understood was visible. This was the power of speaking up, Sarah realized, not just for herself, but for others who might be struggling in silence. One evening, while having dinner with Kate, her sister remarked on the change in her. You seem lighter, Kate observed. Not necessarily happier all the time, but more authentic. Sarah thought about this as she took her evening medication, no longer hiding it in bathroom stalls or under tables. The pills were just part of her routine now, like her morning coffee or evening shower. She still had difficult days. The depression hadn't magically disappeared with disclosure, but the energy she had once spent maintaining a perfect facade could now be directed toward actual healing. Her therapist, Dr. Peterson, noticed the change too. You're not fighting yourself anymore, she noted during their session. You're working with yourself. That night, Sarah updated her journal, something she now did openly at her desk during lunch breaks. She wrote about the fear she had lived with for so long, the relief of finally speaking her truth, and the unexpected community she had found in vulnerability. Her phone buzzed with notifications from the support group chat she had created. People were sharing their daily victories and struggles, offering encouragement and understanding. Sarah smiled, remembering how recently she had felt completely alone in her battle. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Depression wasn't a straight line to recovery, but rather a journey of ups and downs. The difference now was that Sarah no longer felt she had to pretend those downs didn't exist. As she got ready for bed, Sarah caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't perfect, wasn't always strong, and wasn't afraid to admit it anymore. And somehow, that made her stronger than she'd ever been while trying to maintain her facade of perfection. 3 years had passed since Sarah's panic attack in the conference room. Now, at 35, she stood at a podium in front of 200 people at a mental health awareness conference, sharing her journey from silence to advocacy. Depression didn't define me, she told the audience, her voice steady and confident. But hiding it almost destroyed me. The room was silent, filled with professionals from various industries who had come to hear her keynote speech. Life had changed significantly in those 3 years. Sarah had found a balance she never thought possible. Her office desk now held both client presentations and a small sign reading, "It's okay not to be okay," a gift from her team on her work anniversary. That morning, she had taken her medication with her breakfast, chatting with Rachel over video call. The pills were just part of her routine now, like vitamins or allergy medication. She had tried different combinations over the years, working with her doctor to find what worked best for her. Her career had taken an unexpected turn. While still leading marketing projects, she had also become her company's mental health advocate. The support group she had started had grown into a formal network with hundreds of members across different companies. James stopped by her office after the conference. "Remember when you thought telling me about your depression would end your career?" he asked with a smile. "Look at you now." Sarah laughed, remembering her fear from 3 years ago. Her office walls now displayed awards, not just for marketing excellence, but for her work in mental health advocacy. Last month, she had been featured in a business magazine discussing workplace mental health. Depression still visited sometimes. There were still days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, when the fog descended and the world seemed gray. But these days were different now. She had tools to cope, people to lean on, and most importantly, the freedom to say, "I'm not okay today." That evening, Sarah hosted a dinner party, much like she used to in her perfect life days. But this time was different. When Rachel asked how she was doing, she answered honestly about her recent therapy breakthrough. When Kate noticed she seemed tired, Sarah didn't make excuses about work stress. The conversation around her dinner table flowed naturally between work achievements, mental health challenges, and everyday life. Her guests shared their own struggles and victories, creating a space where authenticity was valued over perfection. Later that night, Sarah opened her laptop to update her blog, something she had started 2 years ago to document her journey. Comments from readers around the world filled her screen, sharing how her story had helped them find their own voice. Her phone buzzed with a message from the young intern she had helped years ago, who was now a successful manager herself. "Used your techniques for managing anxiety during my presentation today. They work perfectly. Thank you for teaching me it's okay to not be okay." Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey. She still saw Dr. Peterson monthly, not because she was in crisis, but because she understood the value of maintaining mental health, just like physical health. Looking out her apartment window at the city lights, Sarah reflected on how far she had come. Her life wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was real. The facade she had worked so hard to maintain had been replaced by something much more valuable: genuine connections, honest relationships, and the strength that comes from embracing vulnerability. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would still be difficult days, therapy sessions, medication adjustments, and moments of struggle. But Sarah no longer faced these challenges alone or in silence. As she got ready for bed, Sarah wrote one last entry in her journal. 3 years ago, I thought depression was my greatest weakness. Today, I know that facing it became my greatest strength. The journey continues, but now I walk it proudly, openly, and surrounded by people who understand that healing isn't about reaching a destination. It's about learning to embrace every step of the path. She closed her journal, turned off the light, and fell asleep, at peace with both her struggles and her strength, knowing that her story might help others find their voice, just as she had found hers.